In this video, I'm going to show you a very simple way of shading with your fountain pen called the parallel hatching technique. It involves putting down multiple layers of single directional lines to create the illusion of value. So as an example, if I want to shade a sphere that looks like this, and let's say that my shading is going to run right about here, I'm going to start by applying hatching all going the same direction. And then if I want to go darker, I'm going to apply another coat without changing the direction of my stroke. You can see as the strokes build up little by little, we start getting stronger and stronger illusion of volume. Now, if the strokes are not consistently the same angle, that's not a problem. The most important thing is to keep the distance between the strokes the same. Because if you start going suddenly wider, then the illusion of value gets lost and the hatching goes from value to chicken scratches. Plus, it makes your hatching look kind of messy. So you have to be patient and allow the values to build up little by little until all of the hatching fuses together. Though this is the easiest method of shading, this technique is often used by professional artists, and its most famous practitioner is Leonardo da Vinci, as you can see in this drawing. Here are two very important recommendations. First of all, make sure you're using a fountain pen with a fine nib, since if the lines are too thick, they'll have a hard time fusing together. Second recommendation is to use an ink that is not completely black, one that has a little bit of transparency to it. That'll allow you to control your values more easily and build up your shadows little by little. You can of course use black, but it increases the chance that you'll go too dark too quickly. I have here an Opus 88 Omar with an extra fine nib, which is filled with a dark red ink made by Diamine called Matador. It's a very nice transparent ink. I really like the color, and I really like the way it makes the pen look like some kind of futuristic syringe. Now for the hatching technique. There are a number of different ways to create hatching. So for example, you can hatch with your fingers like this. This is the finger hatch method. This is very good for changing angles. You can curve your lines, and it's very good for little minute details, the finger hatching method. You can hatch with your wrist, so the wrist action, like this. This is good for slightly larger value, slightly larger areas. Also very good for changing angles. And then there's something called elbow hatching, which looks like this. Let me zoom out a little bit. You can plant your elbow on the table like this and then use it as a fulcrum. So you're going to swing off your elbow. So you can see that with the elbow hatching method, I can create very, very long, even lines. It also helps when you're using this method to sneak your fingers way back up on the pen. That's going to increase the size of your stroke. The elbow hatching method. Now, this method is not particularly good for detail. It's not particularly good when you want to change your angle. It makes it a little bit difficult, though I can rotate my paper perfectly free to do that. This method is very good for the parallel hatching technique, however, because, again, it creates very long, even strokes that all go the same direction. So my recommendation is to get a blank piece of paper and fill it with a layer of elbow stroke. You want to practice, and this is the most important thing, keeping your strokes the same width all the way through, right? So once you set up a certain width, let's say this, don't start widening it like this, right? Again, it's going to break the illusion of form. So we're going from value, and then if all of a sudden I start going wider, it turns into a chicken scratch. Okay, so that's the technique. Again, I recommend practicing your hatching a little bit before you actually started drawing, but let's see what this technique looks like in practice. Okay, here we go. To save us time, I've already done a careful pencil underdrawing, and now I'm going to start going in with my pen. I don't always do a pencil underdrawing like this, but you know, there's added pressure in a demo to get things right, so I went ahead and did it. The reason why I don't do a pencil underdrawing quite often is because when you do, your drawing tends to be more accurate, but a little bit drier, less expressive. Why? Because essentially I'm tracing over the pencil lines. I'm no longer really responding to what I'm seeing. So there's always a trade-off, right? The more accurate the pencil underdrawing, the drier the drawing tends to be. If you don't use an underdrawing, quite often you'll make little mistakes. There'll be additional lines. The proportions might be a little bit off, but your drawing tends to be a little bit more expressive. Now, there is kind of a compromise. Sometimes I'll do kind of a rough schematic drawing, kind of indicating basic proportions, basic shapes. I'll do a demo on that at some point down the line. That allows you to correct proportions and also get a little bit more spontaneity of line. All right, I suppose I should talk a little bit about the pen. I will be doing a separate review of it later. But this, once again, is an Opus 88, and it has a 14-karat gold Jowo nib that has a customized grind. So it was originally extra fine, and now it's extra fine. And the custom grind was made by FP Nibs. That's a Spanish company that specializes in all different kinds of custom grinds, Fude nibs, architect nibs. They also do flex customizations. Really good company. What else can I say about the pen? Look, this is one of the few pens on the market that is an eyedropper with a shut-off valve. So the main problem with eyedroppers is that you do have a lot of ink capacity. That's the main advantage of them. But they have a tendency to burp, meaning that your hand heats up the gases in the pen and quite often forces the ink to shoot out of the nib. With that shut-off valve, it essentially seals the ink reservoir and prevents burping, allows you to travel with the pen. So it's safe. It's safe on airplanes. And then the one thing I really like about this is that shutoff valve, when open, actually creates a little bit more flow. So you actually see me untwisting the back of the pen to open up the valve, which creates a little bit more ink flow. It gives me actually a little bit more control. So if I want the pen to write drier, I'll keep the shutoff valve closed, and then if I want it wetter, towards the end of the drawing, when I'm putting details, I'll open it up. That's an added feature that I believe doesn't exist in any other pen other than Japanese vintage pens and also this brand, Opus 88. Okay, so you can see that I'm building up the lines little by little. I'm being systematic. The direction doesn't change. And I'm using the hatch not to emphasize volume, but to indicate value. This technique is very good training for more complex, more advanced types of hatching. Your cross hatching, where you're changing the angle of the stroke, and also cross contour hatching, where your hatching actually curves along the form and emphasizes the volumes you're representing. Why is it good training? Because it allows you to practice controlling the pressure of the stroke and also controlling the width of the stroke. Right, so as I said earlier, very important to keep the width of the stroke consistent all the way through. By practicing the parallel hatch method, by the way, here I opened up the valve, you can see, and it creates a little bit more flow. Anyway, this technique allows you to practice your hatching. So if you're new to cross hatching, new to drawing with a fountain pen, this is the technique I recommend. Now, do you always have to use the elbow hatch in your drawing? No, you don't. When you're starting to go into smaller details, you can use more of your finger or the wrist. However, for the sake of the demo, I'm trying to use the elbow hatch as much as possible. Though, once you start getting into facial features, it becomes really difficult. Again, this technique is better for larger drawings. And then usually the hatching method is a little bit better, you know, when you're covering larger areas as opposed to going into detail like the face. Okay, so I just erased the pencil marks. I could have done that earlier, obviously. Just make sure that the ink is completely dry when you're erasing it, and then I recommend using a kneaded eraser, a soft eraser to erase. The hard erasers can actually lighten the value of certain inks, so you'd have to be careful when you use it. Alright, so finishing up here, putting in some darker details. You can see how systematic I was. Essentially, I was treating this drawing as if I'm dealing with like a watercolor painting. So in watercolor, you always work light to dark. Why? Because if you made the drawing too light, you can always go darker. However, if the drawing is too dark in places, there's no way to lighten it again. So you have to be really systematic and build up little by little. But this is where having a lighter ink and using an extra fine or extra fine nib really helps with the control. Okay, there's the demo. Not a perfect drawing, but then again, what drawing ever is? I hope all of you found this interesting. I plan to do more demos on the many different ways you can draw with fountain pens, either by themselves or in combination with other materials. So please subscribe and stay tuned. If you're interested in the pen I was drawing with, I'll be doing a review of it shortly, along with the other Opus 88 pens in my collection. If you have any questions, please leave them below, and I'll be glad to answer them.